On September 6, 2018, a young African American man, Botham Jean, was sitting on his couch eating ice cream. And suddenly, he heard someone come through his apartment door. He got up to see who it was, and then moments later, he was dead. Many of you watching this know the incident I'm talking about. How was Amber Geiger, a Dallas police officer who came through that apartment door. She was just coming off a shift, was on the phone, distracted, didn't realize she was in the wrong apartment, and saw Botham, assumed he was a burglar, and made the fatal mistake to shoot him and killed him. About a year later, October 1st, 2019, Amber Geiger was found guilty of murder, and on October 2nd, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. It's a sad and tragic event, and it seems to be yet another one involving police officers and unarmed African American men. But the thing that really stands out in this particular incident is what happened in the sentencing hearing. Botham's brother, Brant, giving his victim impact statement, told Amber Geiger that he forgives her, that he hopes she would believe in Jesus. And then he walks across the courtroom and gives Amber a long hug. This is a video that went immediately viral. You'll saw it all over on social media as people shared it and commented on it. It's a powerful image of here's the brother of the killer, of the brother of Botham Jean, hugging her killer, hugging the one who killed him. So a lot to talk about, a lot to think about in relation to this. It suggests a lot about forgiveness, what forgiveness is, and maybe even what forgiveness isn't. I think these are conversations worth having in the local church, and I'm glad to have it with some of my favorite conversation partners, with Scott Rose, with John Talley III, and with my wife, Danae Pierre. Welcome, guys. Good to be here.
Thanks.
So let's talk about this. The first question I have is, I mean, you all saw that video of Brant saying he forgave Amber Geiger and then going to hug her. What did you think about it? What did you feel as you watched that?
Pointing to anybody?
You want to start?
Yeah, anyone. Who wants to start?
You want to start? All right. Yeah, my first reaction, I was kind of just overwhelmed with what an amazing act of mercy and grace that was. I think any of us who experienced even the littlest amount of broken relationship or harm and have had to move towards someone who's been an offender towards us understands that is not an easy act to wrap your arms around someone who has caused so much pain to your family or to your life. And so just my initial thought was, man, how would I feel if I was him embracing this woman, and all the kind of emotional pit in your stomach things that you're fighting to be able to move towards someone. So I really just saw it as something to kind of pause and take in, and really I contemplated in my own life areas where I know that God's continuing to call me to forgiveness, and really just kind of felt like a real moment of worship. I also kind of had this mixed emotion and reaction of just what, because I guess I watched the video in context of people reacting so strongly against it, so I didn't see it neutral. So I knew as I was watching the video that I was watching something that was causing a lot of people I care about to be disrupted and disoriented. Okay. So I also was just aware of just the complexity of, that this isn't as simple as, there's so many things. There's that moment in which we can just kind of think, pause and look and wonder at what God's grace does, but also so many social issues and a lot of different angles to look at this. I kind of felt this conflicted sense of, lots of conflicting emotions.
Yeah, I think for me it was more just like, if I can just sum it up in just one word, it was mainly just shocking, I would say. I was just kind of like shocked by how he responded in that. There's a part of me that was just like, wow, in some ways that is the proper response to have, even though it's difficult and challenging to have that response. But it was just more like, wow, just shocking, you know. And some of the articles I read too, that was kind of one of the common responses that a lot of people had. It was just more like, wow, this is crazy. Good opportunity to talk with people. I know some people in my family, they have some very strong, has some strong words to say with this whole situation. But it actually kind of served as a opportunity to talk about the gospel, Jesus, and how we should respond.
Okay. I mean, you guys sort of suggested this, that people had a lot of different reactions to this. And I think one of the reasons people reacted to it is because it's so striking, right? Here's the brother of someone who got killed, and he's hugging his brother's killer, really hugging him, right? And I think one of the things that initially came across to me, was always from at least people's reactions, was like, look, here it is. I think one of the things that people sort of felt drawn to was like, we're in a divided country, and here is a picture of how we heal that division, particularly some racial divisions and other things like that. I'd be curious, and I've heard different people react to that. I think some people don't like this incident as being used in that way. Mm-hmm. How do you guys feel about that? Is this a model do you guys walk away from this saying, yeah, this is a model for forgiveness for us, and it's something that we should really sort of draw from?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I would say that I was, well, first let me say, just with this whole conversation, I know we're a little removed from it now, a couple of months removed. And in some sense, we're RCC today, but I'm sort of glad that we've taken time to digest it. In a world where we have to have immediate reactions to everything, social media is, we have to jump and have an opinion. It's nice that we're able to just sit back and think through things. Mm-hmm. I think that for me, in seeing the video, because I wasn't tied to the story, this is what drew me into the story. Mm-hmm. It was not having an immediate reaction myself, but it was watching others. And I watched one brother who actually, first post was, this is injustice, she only got 10 years.
Yeah.
How do we deal with this? Mm-hmm. And then the video comes out of the forgiveness, and he goes, that just put me in my place. I need to rethink this. And like Danae, it made me think, oh my gosh, how much have I not forgiven other people? Because I'm first looking for justice before forgiveness.
Okay.
And it made me reevaluate things in my life and relationships in my life.
Yeah, and I would say to that, there's kind of always been this message that the historic African American church has given to its oppressors in terms of modeling this real sacrificial embracing of their offenders and perpetrators and murderers. And there's just, when you look at this just, to me, was another story in a line of centuries of stories of faithful witness from God's people. And so I was a little, in one sense, I think it's really important to let his voice, his hug, speak for himself, and to honor, this is really kind of a sacred, you're standing on holy ground moment. It really does bear witness.
You said that in your social media post.
Yeah, it bears witness to the gospel in a really profound way. And that doesn't take away that there's other ways to bear witness to the gospel, of which the Black church has also had a historic voice into. Mm-hmm. And so, Botham Jean's mother posted the next day and made this comment about like why she wasn't ready to give a hug. And she acknowledged that in forgiveness and moving toward an offender and embracing them, it doesn't mean that you don't notice the injustice and pain. It doesn't make it okay that it was 10 years versus what would have been maybe a sentence for someone if the ethnicities were reversed. And so I think there's this significant part of the story in the hug, the act of forgiveness that is real. And also, he's going to be forgiving 70 times 7 for the rest of his life. The first Christmas, he doesn't get to celebrate. The first time he's a dad and his kids don't have an uncle, he's going to be forgiving over and over and over again. Not past acts, but the way injustice and pain and suffering impact a present moment. And then I would say I think part of what's hard with social media is people are reacting to two things. There's that individual act of the murder, and then there's this systemic cultural thing that's happening in which there is a people who feel like, do you see the systemic sin and oppression and injustice? And that's a whole nother conversation that requires a different type of thing to address. I think it gets so enmeshed that we want to say, oh, the hug is forgiveness, and everyone who is disrupted and disoriented by the other parts of the story, they're wrong. They're less Christian and they're missing it. At the same time, I think it's not helpful to dismiss that act of forgiveness.
So I was gonna say, kind of piggyback off that a little bit, is like I've seen what some people have done is kind of almost weaponize the forgiveness. So for instance, like you had people that didn't say anything at all about his murder, but the moment that his brother goes into a courtroom and forgives, and now a lot of people are like, oh well, see, here it is, this is that thing right here, this is what we need to do, stuff like that. But then like you had nothing to say about an image bearer of God actually being murdered and killed in his own home when he didn't even do anything wrong. So I feel like sometimes these expressions of forgiveness, they tend to be put as, okay, this is it. This is what you need to be doing. Don't be protesting. Don't do this. This is what that is. And almost kind of use the forgiveness as almost like a weapon to see. See, if y'all not doing it this way, then and
which actually cheapens the act. So it takes that kind of holy moment and cheapens the act of forgiveness. Instead of taking it in and wondering, what's my role to play? Well, my role as a distant observer is to begin to think about the contaminated evidence and the body cameras being turned off and the crime scene being messed with. And like my role is to think as a citizen, there's a problem going on systemically. What can we do? Could we do anything? What does that look like? But instead it becomes weaponized. And then again, it doesn't allow us to sit in the incredible complexity of this story.
Yeah.
But with regards to weaponizing it, I think that's an interesting term.
You think it's too strong?
Huh? Well, I don't know. I don't know how John's received it and what he read and how they weaponized it. They very well may have.
Yeah.
But if we start to use that term synonymously with forgiveness, that's danger. I mean, because I think your last question was, is this a solution, or at least part of the solution to reconciliation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the heart of the cross, right?
Yeah.
It is the forgiveness, and it's at almost the only thing that Brant was missing is if he went and said, "I'll take her sentence for her."
Yeah.
That was the act of the cross right there, of the forgiveness and taking on the pain.
Yeah.
And he's, by saying "I forgive you," he's basically saying, I'm going to take the punishment for the future Christmases and the future birthdays.
Right.
And he's taking that on himself. That is really, I think we're going to get into the justice aspect of it, but I think to just sort of sweep that under the rug and just basically say, and I don't think that's what you're saying at all, Josh.
I would say, I would think even with that, it, I think, was in the reaction of trying to just kind of, I think, cheapen that. Like what you just described is a very powerful act. And even on even with Christ, forgiveness comes through also, there's also a sense of confession and having faith that you are forgiven, which is a process of confession and reconciliation is always, Jesus is who reconciles us.
Correct.
But we're reconciled to him through faith, and there's an element of confessing your sin.
Correct.
That too.
And I think that's the wholeness of forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
But Jesus even says on the cross, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Agreed.
It's he's offering that forgiveness even when it's not confessed.
Agreed.
And in the Lord's Prayer,
Agreed.
Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Agreed. There's this constant call to forgiveness.
Totally. And I think on the part of the offended party, forgiveness is extended for the sake of even the victim. Correct. It's not necessarily to make you feel better. It's often for the sake of the victim, but it's effective, and it can only lead to real healing and reconciliation when there is a willingness to name it.
Yeah, when the circle's complete.
Yeah.
When somebody actually confesses.
And I think that's where it got tricky, and it's hard to separate from a distance when you're not actually the person in the story. What's happening one-on-one with with kind of culture and society is to celebrate this exchange of a hug without pausing personally to think, why am I more empathetic towards Amber than I was towards one of the last 20 African American men shot? Like, why? What is it? What's happening in culture that I feel more empathy and like, man, like this is a mistake and this is a horrible thing? I think that disruption is really hard to sit in because it moves it from observing. I think why it erupted on social media was it wasn't just an act to observe. Because of our racial history, it became an instant, what's our part of this? What's our role in reconciliation with each other? What does this look like?
You did. So you're saying you did feel empathy for her?
Not me. I'm saying these are questions. I think as you looked at what was happening on social media and some of the fighting that was happening, instead of it turning into fighting, there could have been some pauses and reflections in terms of, okay, am I being more empathetic to Amber than I would have been to the previous couple? And I think that's what John is saying. John's saying people who had no empathy for these last 10 people were really burdened for Amber and really celebrating in this moment. And there is much to celebrate in that moment. And it's okay to have empathy for Amber and to look and the complexity of all that was happening. But that without thinking about it more holistically in the larger conversation we're having in our nation on race keeps us from being able to be participants of the work that needs to be done on justice.
Let's think a little bit more about forgiveness. So this is a quote from Jamar Tisby in the Washington Post. So this is when you said, so what do we mean by weaponizing forgiveness? I think I heard this from some of my African American friends, this feeling that, he puts it this way: when another black man has been murdered by a person charged to serve and protect, forgiveness should neither be demanded nor assumed. If all white people expect all black people to extend forgiveness as quickly as Brant and Jean did, then they understand neither black people nor black pain. No one should expect swift mercy from every black person. And the risk of offering such speedy forgiveness is that not nearly enough attention is given to injustice itself. And it kind of goes on from there. Just the Bible urges forgiveness and also urges justice. What's interesting to me is this. I wonder,
does the Bible urge forgiveness? That's a good question. Or does the Bible demand forgiveness?
Okay, here's the question. Okay, so does the Bible urge, demand forgiveness? Sort of an extension of that is it? Well, let me just
yeah, but I think what he's saying is, does the Bible say you get to demand forgiveness from me? No.
Correct.
If you offend me, you only get to confess and ask my forgiveness, and then I'm demanded by my Father to forgive you. And I think that's the rub. Is in this moment, we're not talking about someone else's sin. We're talking about society's offense. What role does forgiveness have in the work of justice?
Yeah, and is there? I guess so. I'm curious in terms of, as we think of forgiveness, I wonder if was there a degree in which maybe some of the response against it, and let me just sort of say, I think we've elaborated on what the significance of the forgiving act, and I appreciate what you guys are saying. We should appreciate what it is. I wonder, is there any degree in which we should appreciate maybe the sense that the ways in which people were sort of posting it and saying, see, you need to forgive just like he did, and not realizing that for some people's process is longer and harder. And so I think his mother and the sister as well basically said, look, we're not there yet. We want to be there, but we're not there yet. I wonder if that's part of it as well. That I wonder sometimes, I do this in premarital counseling sometimes. I go, look, I said, I'm sorry, forgive me right now, right? You're a Christian. It's almost like a guilt trip type of, and I wonder if that's
the weaponizing.
And I wonder if that exacerbates actually some of the racial tension.
I think that was helpful.
What'd you say?
That's the weaponizing.
In terms of what you just said, that's the weaponizing what I'm saying. And it's almost like we say this all the time too. There's a both and to things, right? Yeah. So I think what tends to happen is it's almost like a seesaw. People focus on one aspect, and that's the part that they really focus on, whether it's just the forgiveness or obviously we have to also talk about justice and what does that mean, what does that look like, and stuff like that. I'm just saying that in terms of this particular situation, I mean, you take the different situations like what happened in Ferguson, and some of the black people were protesting, they burnt stuff down, that's one expression to not being heard, right? Not being heard of the different injustices that's taking place, etc. Somebody would look at that and they would say, well, this expression here, they will focus on this is the one that you need to focus on. This is one that you need to do, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, it's like we're not understanding necessarily holistically how people are actually feeling in the moment of what's going on in their real lives. And people are so removed from that. They're so removed from that. And these are the same, some of these same people are not, they didn't mention anything about the person actually being murdered.
Yeah.
Like an image bearer of God was actually murdered and killed in their own home.
Yeah.
Like that's a like that in and of itself is what I'm saying, that we're just like, some people are just like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So does that bother you?
It bothers me a lot because like I like.
But I mean, do you?
As a black,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, it bothers me a lot. One, as a black man, like I'm saying, like when I look at these types of situations that happen, these police brutality, killings and murders of unarmed black men, like it's a communal thing for me because I'm black and I can say like, man, that could potentially happen to me, or that can happen to my uncle, that can happen to my brother, etc. So it's much more like, wow, like this is more real to me. I mean, for some people, particularly our white brothers and sisters, they have a way that they can kind of just turn it on and turn it off and kind of like disconnect from it. But what I'm saying is, in terms of the weaponizing, it's like, it's almost like this is what it is, and you don't have anything else to say about the real injustice that people are actually
So we need
feeling.
to speak to that, but then is there a danger in which it can tip over then into really not appreciating you sort of alluded to this, the fact that there's a holy ground moment, there is a legacy of black people
Well,
forgiving
and
each
I
other,
would say
right?
if we take it back to like, how does reconciliation actually happen? If you're posting or you're communicating to a friend, like, look it, this is an act of forgiveness, get over it. That's a very that's like a hard-hearted anti-Christ spirit to communicate with someone, because the reason Jesus can say, Father, forgive them, and the reason Jesus, when after he rises from the dead, he goes to victims, people whose best friend was murdered in front of them, body torn, side pierced, and he embraces them, lets them feel his wounds, and breathes on them his breath, and says, if you forgive, you'll be forgiven, or something along those lines. Like if you forgive them, they will be forgiven. Something, I'm misquoting. You guys can post the real reference, but there's just this moment of the reason Jesus can call victims to forgive is because he was the victim. And so if we're feeling a sense of like our own awareness of the injustice and our discomfort in it, there's a sense of which we evaluate where we're victims, and we, because of Christ's bloody body and him being the first victim and his identification with us, we follow his steps in forgiveness. But we also pause and say, where are we participants of this system? Where are we oppressors? And that moment of picturing yourself as Amber getting hugged by this young man is Jesus hugging you, and like, what would that feel like? That should only motivate language that brings us to a table of reconciliation. That's the holy ground moment. It's not just thinking of what is it like to be the victim, but what is it like to be that offender? And then how does that actually flesh out into our day-to-day life?
Right. I think that's helpful. Going back to what John says of white people being able to distance themselves or turn it on and
Some
off.
of them.
Some of them.
Not all.
Probably me. You probably pointed at me.
I didn't have that in mind, but
Sure you did. What I find somewhat troubling here, or at least I'm cautious of, is, like, for example, when I see Bryant forgiving, I didn't see it as a black and white moment. I just saw it as a man who was a victim forgiving.
even with the history of
Did not-
white
did
cops murdering,
No,
That's
I didn't.
interesting.
I did not. I just saw a man who had something torn from him, and it doesn't matter what his circumstances are, going and offering them forgiveness. Now, here's what I find troubling is, or potentially troubling, is that it's turned into a movement, and he's expected to be a part of that movement. So, and rightfully so. I mean, as a community that has been, like you're talking about the history, there's been a lot of pain and suffering that's been involved. And what I've heard, and I don't think it's in the church, but I've heard it outside the church, is hold on to your victimhood because that's your most powerful asset. And what he did by forgiving is he gave up his victimhood.
Right.
And
That's the beauty of.
That's troubling to me. Is he's getting pushed back on?
Oh, agreed.
Because he gave up, and
Yeah.
you guys, you don't understand the bigger struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brant,
The push.
you've got to
Yeah.
not offer
Yeah.
this forgiveness so quickly,
So
that we can move
Yeah.
socially in this direction.
So I would agree the pushback on his personal act was troublesome, and for all the reasons you just said. I also say I'm not surprised when you looked at it, you don't see race, and this would kind of be my encouragement to my white brothers who I love, is that because you're wired to see things very individualistic, a one story, what John is saying is this in a kind of African American or Hispanic context, it is communal.
Correct. I know. I understand that.
There is a distant, Michael Brown is murdered, and there's a visceral family feeling, right? And so that's where like it is. There's always two stories going on with news stories. There's the act, and then what it represents.
So what I'm saying is, I didn't see necessarily within the context of the entire trial, absolutely the black and white issue. In that moment of forgiveness.
But even in that moment, there's something, because of all the pain and suffering, even more profound
He even
that
said,
he moved toward her.
Brant said himself, I'm speaking for myself.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he did say that.
And so basically, he wasn't saying that this is what my community, my family should do for me, myself.
Right.
And so when I saw that, I saw two individuals.
Yeah, and his family said the next day. I think that was the point. Was his mother the next day had a very beautiful response. It wasn't. I would rather contrast his participation with her participation as opposed to rioting, because she was not ready, and she said we're working through a process. And I think as the church, we need to walk with victims, and it takes time to forgive, and we shouldn't be speeding people through. And her response was also, I thought, very. Got like a very beautiful picture of the gospel as well, but no one wanted to talk about that. One was her answer was a little more disruptive.
And when we read her, she said, "Forgiveness for us as Christians is a healing for us. As our husband said, there are consequences. Does not mean that everything we have. That doesn't mean that everything else we have suffered has to go unnoticed." She goes on to talk about things that she hopes will change. And then the Botham sister says this: "What Botham did, I truly admire. I pray every day to get to the point of forgiveness, and he is already there. That's a weight lifted from him. He hugged her brother's killer to free himself, and I stand behind him 100%. But for those who feel any different, I respect that. Not everyone is in the same mental place at the same time." So I think what we want to say here is that there's something really important to appreciate about forgiveness here that we shouldn't dilute, right?
And we can't demand it, and we got to be patient with people.
So we shouldn't dilute it
ourselves.
But we should also realize that there's more to than just that one act. That is sort of. I think church community becomes really important. How we walk alongside one another in this, and how we have multiple eyes to see, to draw out all that we should draw out from this.
Yeah.
That there's so much at play when it comes to forgiveness and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And I think all of that holistically helps us, better understand the gospel and better be joined together in the gospel.
Agreed.
That's good.
I agree.
All right. Thank you guys.